Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Evidence-Based Argumentation Science, a Reading Apprenticeship Approach. We're very excited you could be with us today as this is part of a series on discipline literacy that has been sponsored by the Secondary Partnership and the Strategic Literacy Initiative. So let me tell you a little bit about the Secondary Literacy Partnership. It is a partnership that's made up between the California Department of Education, the California Teachers Association, and we also have the Association of California School Administrators with us, as well as the CSESA, the California County Superintendents of Education Association, and the California Comprehensive Center here at Western that I'm representing. So excited to be with you. The mission of the Secondary Literacy Partnership is to promote literacy as a universal right, to empower educators to equip students with skills to read, write, speak meaningfully across all disciplines as lifelong learners. And we've done this for many years, sponsoring webinars, face-to-face events, etc. This initiative is part of a series, as we said, focusing on discipline literacy, and we've had webinars. This is the third in the series, and we have related resources. And after the webinar, we've had extension activities that have been sponsored with the Strategic Literacy Initiative in our Collaborate in Common. We can tell you more about that towards the end of the series. But without further ado, I'd like to now hand over to one of our presenters from the group here at Westgate. Will Brown is a researcher and professional development associated with the Strategic Literacy Initiative in the Teacher Professional Development Program, where Will provides professional development and coaching for the reading apprenticeship for secondary teachers, and he designs professional development and supports the Strategic Literacy Initiative's cadre of reading apprentice facilitators, assuring high-quality school services. So without further ado, Will, I'll hand it over to you, and Carolyn.
Thank you, Julie, and I'm really glad to be here with Carolyn. I've worked with many science teachers over the years, and I'm especially pleased to have Carolyn join us today. She's been a teacher for 25 years herself at Cesar Chavez Middle School in Union City, California. She's a very skilled science teacher in integrating reading into her science instruction. I'm just delighted that she's with us today, and I think you'll find her wisdom about teaching students as compelling as I do.
And so just to review the housekeeping quickly for those of you just arrived, we will be writing and sending and interacting in the chat, and thank you, so many of you have already done that. We'll be doing some quick polls and multiple choice. And we really encourage you to learn with and from one another in the chat, as well as posting questions and comments. Thank you for typing in introductions, a little bit about your role. Actually, we're going to do a quick poll, and there's going to be two parts of this poll. It will pop up in the bottom right-hand panel at the bottom of your screen. One will be your role, and one will be, in your role, what disciplines do you support. So I'm going to pass that over and ask you to do this quick poll with us. And again, it will be going for a minute. It'll give you time to choose from both of those. So you should see it in about pop up on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you could scroll down and do that for us, thank you. And again, there's two polls. If you go to the bottom, there will be another one. About 5 more seconds. Okay, so we can publish that, and Will and Carolyn, can you see that? I'm looking at the percentage. Lots of folks are saying school site coach, secondary grades, teachers mostly on the call today, a few county office folks, as well as some folks doing research. In terms of disciplines, it seems that science and engineering with representations from ELA as well as math are on the call, and some social studies as well, and world languages. So And some folks typed in other. So one more quick, before we start to jump in, how many of you are familiar with the secondary, with the reading apprenticeship? And if you've had a chance to attend, let us know by hitting in the bottom right. You can either write the check yes or no. That'll be great. So looking at that screen, Will, do you see people's replies? Some folks are saying yes, some folks are saying not yet. So I look at the quick poll at the bottom of the screen. I would say of the people on the call, about 10 have said yes, and the remainder have said not yet. So Will, I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this work and take us from there. So the ball is over to you, Will.
Thank you, Julie. For me, I love inquiry. I enjoy figuring stuff out. It's what drew me to science. I enjoy doing it myself. I enjoy doing it with others. So for me, science is both personal and social.
Can you talk up a little?
I sure can, thanks.
Okay.
And that's why I love teaching, especially science. And I'm sure a lot of us science teachers feel that way about teaching and learning. Whichever subject we have, it's kind of magical in a wonderful way, not mysterious. And I think there's so much need for STEM and for students. There's so many opportunities for students in science and technology, engineering, and mathematics. But for many, there's a lot less opportunity than there should be. And that also drew me to teaching. The young people I worked with at Skyline High School in Oakland, they're very bright and resourceful. And I found if I could engage them in learning, they could learn anything in the science curriculum. And that was really quite lovely. So why reading apprenticeship approach? Why did I stick with it? I went to a training in 1999. It's really long ago now, and I was intrigued because the training and the work was all inquiry and all literacy, a great combination. I think what was important for me is I had ongoing support. I wasn't a fast learner. I learned little by little, trying out routines and scaffolds to support my students to read science texts. And what kept me going with that long learning curve for me was that making thinking visible gave my students more opportunity to learn science. Students who had disengaged from school, they didn't like science, or maybe they were profoundly inexperienced readers, were more and more willing to reinvest, to re-engage. And I learned how to engage students in metacognitive conversations in pairs, in groups, and whole class about reading, about sense-making. Started to swap in texts and metacognitive conversations and reading for what I had done with lectures before. And what was really most important about it was that the more I supported reading, the more I could support inquiry learning. And I think I could pair reading with investigations and could replace cookbook labs more and more with student design lab projects. And what I persisted with is because students could learn more and succeed. Supporting literacy in science was really a way to support science, and for me that was the bottom line, to support students in science. And so when I was using reading apprenticeship in my classroom, I knew that it was supported reading. You could use it in other disciplines. I'm glad we have a lot of people from ELA and history and different disciplines here. I knew it was for middle school and for high school. I knew that it had begun as a project in San Francisco Unified School District, that the goal was to fashion real solutions for the literacy stealing, limiting the prospects of our young people. And I knew that the teachers were partners in the development of reading apprenticeship. I knew that much. And I knew that it helped my students. What I didn't know really was about the research and design that went into it, and that's now my focus as I've transitioned to actually working with reading apprenticeship at Wested. So that's sort of how I got here, and how I sort of fall in as a as a person who spent a lot of years learning about chemistry, how I ended up being focusing on literacy, and certainly literacy in science. So I've shifted from supporting students to supporting teachers. It's been a huge learning curve for me, no doubt. I contributed to the testing and scale-up of reading apprenticeship. You'll see a lot of these large-scale grant projects here on the screen. The big picture is that Reading Apprenticeship has shown positive impacts in changing teaching practices and improving student learning outcomes. So that's another reason why. In one study I'm thinking of, in high school biology and U.S. history classrooms of teachers, they had 10 days of Reading Apprenticeship PD over the year and a half. Their students had significantly higher scores in both content and reading comprehension tests than the control group students. The students ended up being 1 year ahead in reading compared to the control group at the end of the assessment. Really exciting results. And what this means is that supporting students in literacy in our disciplines is worth it for all stakeholders, for parents, for teachers, for schools and states. Not that it's easy to do, but that it's worth doing. So our agenda for today, our webinar is focusing on argumentation. A recent study by Goldman and Greenleaf and a whole lot of other people, and a paper really shows that link between literacy and argumentation. Thinking about engagement of argumentation is both a unique purpose for reading, why we read, and it's a performance standard for reading for understanding. You can think about it that way, and I think that's what links it so tightly together. Argumentation, of course, is important for all the disciplines. This paper that's boxed up there on the screen has focuses on history, on literature, literary analysis literature within ELA, and also in science, the idea of argumentation. So a lot there. If it's a good read, if you love diving into thick papers, that's a great one. I'd recommend it. In this first section, we're going to think about text as a resource for inquiry, particularly in science. In the next section, we're going to think about making sense with science text, and we're going to hear a lot from Carolyn about how she does it with her, supports students in literacy and science with her colleagues at her school. And in the third section, we're going to think about a construct called interactive argumentation, which is really a third way, if you will, thinking about argumentation instruction that can provide lots of opportunities for learning to argue in all of our disciplines. I think you're going to see the ties across to other disciplines, even though the examples are in science quite a bit. And in that third section, we'll see a video of a classroom, a bit of Carolyn. That's a reason to persevere to the end, even if it's starting to get late for you all on the East Coast. So I'm going to jump right ahead. The title for this first section is Text as Resources for Inquiry, and there's no argument here. And so I want to make that link. And the big link is that science inquiry is the context for science argumentation. And that's what makes it uniquely connected. What's interesting about science and literacy is they've had an uncomfortable working relationship in the classroom and even in our professional societies. Sometimes we've heard reading as something that would undermine inquiry. We've also had times and advocates for science being this great place to actually learn how to support students to learn how to read. And it's really not an either-or situation. Integration of science and literacy is not only possible, but it's beneficial and necessary. We're going to hear certainly from Carolyn how she's done it, and we're going to look at some of the sort of things to consider in this first section. Of course, we all grappled with the Common Core standards, or our own state standards, calling for integration of literacy across the discipline. We're responding to the next generation science standards. Either a lot of our states are adopting them or pulling some of the pieces in and using them to influence their standards, calling for science practices, linking back to the Common Core standards. Certainly in the next generation science standards, we have this idea of literacy being a key item and a key practice. The first sort of big thing to deal with when you're thinking about text as a resource for inquiry is the topic. And when we think about the topic, then we're going to take a moment to talk about the topic, the text, the task, the schools, and teacher mediation. We'll take them one by one. We'll pause, have a chance to see what's going on in chat. The topic, I think we think about when we're working about designing or thinking about with our colleagues and developing of instruction for students. We want to think about the topic that we choose. One of the first things is how does it relate to the core concepts and the content, which is kind of an obvious one. Maybe a little bit less obvious and sort of thoughtful is for the concepts is how do they relate to
Will, are you okay?
how do they relate to? Yeah, I turned my notes.
Coming in and out. Sorry.
Okay, I'm not sure how to. I'll get a little closer to the phone.
No, I just said you're coming in and out. So yeah, keep going. Sorry, I just wanted to know if you needed any help.
Oh, thanks. Great. So when we think about the fit of the phenomena that's related to a topic, one of the big things is the idea of having a topic that's phenomena-based. It's shared along a lot of approaches. And does that phenomena connect up to the disciplinary core ideas? Is it relate to developmentally appropriate science practices? Is there relevance for the students, to themselves, to their community? These are important things to think about when you're thinking about the topics for design. We're going to hear about Carolyn and some of the way she and her colleagues think about choosing topics for their learning. Is the phenomena provide accessible and sufficient accessibility and complexity for the students? Are the puzzlements and conundrums available in that phenomena that would support engagement and deeper learning? And the scope is always an issue. In science, everything ties to everything else, but does this phenomena allow you to have to investigate it with a manageable amount of empirical data and theory? So these things are pretty common among multiple different ways of thinking about designing new learning for science that responds to both the Common Core and the NGSS standards. But that last one, I think, is something I want to spotlight: documentation, and that is, does the phenomena, is it documented with a wide range of accessible texts that sort of vary in text type and the appropriate challenge level? And when we sort of think about, what all needs to be in place for a phenomena to be a good phenomena for our students to puzzle around and learn science through, I think all of these things come into play. And I want to actually ask Carolyn to jump in, and so you can hear her and from her what some of the things she does with her colleagues in picking phenomena for their units.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Will. A lot of the things that Will already talked about are true about when we try to find our phenomenon, but really we think of phenomenon as the sort of the thing that we can hang the learning on and that will kind of keep the students engaged in what we're doing. Sometimes we pick one that's like really long range that we take for an entire unit, and sometimes it's just a story that gets the kids to sort of dig into a particular concept that we're working with. It is difficult to find them with that text set that Will mentioned earlier. The documentation piece, I have to agree, is the most difficult part for us.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. And so I think we'll focus actually on those text sets and what actually it is that can make it difficult, in addition to just its connection back to the phenomena. And so these text sets, they're built around the phenomena, whether they're just for problematizing or transitioning or a hook, or whether there's something, like you said, quite long range, Carolyn. Do the texts present the students with, sufficient amount of comprehension challenge that are typical with science reading? Are they, that Goldilocks, not too easy, not too hard, but the right amount of challenge so that they can learn through reading them, learning how to read science text? So that's one aspect of it. The actual content, they need to have that compelling content that you mentioned a few different sort of content purposes that they could serve, transitions or building deep knowledge over time. The uniqueness, it's interesting if you're wanting students to learn how to grapple with multiple texts and be able to argue from them, argue like why something is a particular problem and deserves study, or the right model that we should use for thinking about and analyzing the data. That each text you want to have has to have some unique information, unique data, or unique theory for them to actually have a need to pull them together. The idea of reliability is a real tricky one, and just thinking about it's something that you need to focus on. Are you going to how much of a challenge around the area of reliability are you going to pile into the already challenging work of the inquiry and investigation, but it's a factor to consider. And then the idea of how to sequence them over a time to hook students, to build knowledge with them, integrating them and layering them with the hands-on and student-designed investigations. There's a lot of factors and many right answers, and I was curious, Carolyn, what are some of the things that you do for actually thinking about those texts? You said it was a hard problem. What are some of the things that you all in your department do?
Well, I mean, I think for us, we really, because we have such a huge variation in our classrooms of ability level, we try to look for things that can be sort of vertical texts. That way I can challenge my strong readers and have something that's more accessible for my readers that are struggling, but also to really vary it, like the different types of reading. I mean, the classic of like many students don't see a chart, as you see on this slide here, as a text. And so we try to bring in some of those visual type texts and really talk about them to see, like, I mean, that's one of those keys, right? Students don't realize that the charts and graphics are giving them tons of information. So we try to get a real variety of things so they can go from multiple texts.
I loved hearing about how you use vertical text, so as they enter in with easier text, perhaps more accessible ones that everyone can grapple with, it builds knowledge up to those more challenging texts so that students who couldn't deal with them before now have schema and scaffold as well as the social supports and routines to help them handle the harder text. So I want to turn it over to the group to take a quiet moment, or you can put into chat what are some of the things that you think about when you select text for students in class, or when you think about this question, even if that's not your role right now. I see we had a question about a vertical text set, and that's a number of texts on the same topic that vary in their reading challenge. And the design is by reading up through them, it's a scaffold to be able to handle the grade level text that you get to along the way.
Well, we'll give folks another 30 seconds to share.
Oh, yeah, nice.
So back to you. Lots of great sharing.
Excellent, and there's so much there that could be called out. I'm hoping you're taking a moment to read your colleagues' ideas there, and all of them seem really great. I love the one about considering the cultural representation. There's just some really neat things in the text, and it's all the different things that are balancing. You know, it's why teachers' jobs and creativity are such a huge thing. Carolyn, is there anything in the chat that you wanted to call out particularly or comment on?
No, I'm seeing a lot of really great things here. That's nice to see.
Yeah, I'm right with you. So moving down through sort of these different factors to consider when using text as a resource for inquiry, one is the task that you wrap around the text. And what I threw up here, instead of a list of tasks, is a list of the science practices from the next generation science standards. I'm curious about if we could get a show of hands who's familiar with them at all, these next generation science standards or 3D learning.
You can put your hands up using the hand up button on the bottom. Lots of hands going up, Will, and yeses and nos. Yes.
Great. As it's closer or farther away from our own discipline, our awareness of that they are existing or we might be working with them quite frequently varies. But the big gist is that with 3D learning, that you're learning the cross-cutting ideas and the core ideas through enacting and learning the practices of science. And so when the tasks engage students in the science practices, then the argumentation is going to actually be very much about science. Whether you're arguing about what's the big question here, and someone talked about in their comment about using text to make students curious and engage with the topic and find out what's problematic with it. Whether you're interpreting data to use a text, someone talked about it, bringing text in just in time. If they need help interpreting data, maybe they could read about how to interpret the data they're using, and that makes it being super relevant to the students in the investigation they're going on. And you could be arguing, therefore, over what's the proper interpretation of this data, what are the principles. And so when the arguments in science, the argumentation tasks, turn back to these principles, then the warrants and the knowledge is going to actually be about science principles and practices. An alternative, and I'm not saying this alternative is a bad thing, I'm just noting some alternatives to arguing about the practices of science, might be to argue a more socio-scientific argument, maybe more of a policy or personal choice. Should we limit oil use as a country, right? Or should we change our eating habits to be vegetarians, maybe as an individual choice there. And then the warrants of the arguments are more about policy and values as well as science, and it shifts the affordance of the argumentation task. The reason I mention that is one of the low-hanging fruit that teachers think of, because it's really engaging, is let's have a policy argument in science class. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it just has different affordances of when you're arguing through how to interpret data in an investigation, or arguing over what's the best model for representing the information we have and data we have. So I want to move ahead, as I know our time is moving up, to some really interesting, what's really important then, so we've thought about the texts themselves, the topics, the tasks. We're starting to think about what are those tools and scaffolds that could support using text as a resource for inquiry, and therefore to support and as a basis for argumentation in science. Well, there's certainly a lot of them. Prompts and routines for metacognitive conversations and sense-making discussions, routines for making thinking visible, and I think we see some examples of that sort of prompts for students, science reading stems and science talking stems. For the teacher, talk stems to engage students and to turn that work of thinking and talking over to them, to shift that thinking over to them. Modeling, actually your own teacher's thinking. And then you see an evidence interpretation note taker as sort of support for that real hard work of poring over data and finding in data what's actually evidence, and that work of linking those evidence to claims. I think we're going to hear a lot about this from Carolyn, so I'm going to trim this off just a little bit because I think what she has to say will illustrate it in ways that resonates really deeply. And the final factor to think about is really all that the teachers are doing. And I think we've touched on this. In all of your comments earlier, you talked about the decision-making that teachers would be making about the types of text and purposes of text. Even this person said, I'd like to use text right at the moment it's useful. And think about the dynamic assessment and locating that text, which is tons of work. So the orchestrating of the reading and reasoning and modeling tasks, demonstrating how a teacher actually reads a text so that students can pick up ways of reading not just from each other, but also from the teacher who has experience with science reading. Also with modeling and argumentation, the talk. And then that ongoing formative assessment and reasoning and modeling. The tools we saw in the last slide are definitely going to be available online to people. And I think we're going to see a real picture of this sort of mediation in the example we hear from Carolyn and from her class and in the video. So I'm going to move ahead right now and just ask people to what's something that you do in your practice about using text as a resource for investigation that you're thinking about now, and what would you like to learn more about on this topic? Let's take a minute to pause and reflect.
So we're a little behind, so we'll ask folks to finish up what they're typing.
So it's star 6, it's not pound 6.
Okay, Will, I think for the light of time, can we just keep moving forward? We have some great comments in there. Do you want to make some quick comments, you and Carolyn, about them? Thanks, everyone, for posting them. Will, Carolyn?
I just encourage people to go ahead and read them. And Carolyn, did you want to talk about what you do in your classroom in school?
Sure. I guess I think one example will be coming up pretty soon, but I like a lot of the ideas that are coming up in here, and I definitely see text as someone mentioned earlier, as an as-needed basis, and when sort of a grappling thing that we go through when we pick text is, you know, which texts are worth the time it takes to be able to really dig into them. And that's a key question that we ask ourselves a lot when we're picking text for all the things we do.
Thank you.
Carolyn, I'll give you the balls, so the ball's in your court, so you can move forward.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julie. So in this section, I just was going to spend a few minutes just sort of telling our story here in New Haven. We teach in a district here in New Haven Unified School District. We received several grants and lots of different policies, but we've done some the district has been working with Reading Apprenticeship for about 6 years. And all of our middle schools, well, we only have 2, but our 2 middle schools and our high school, all the science and core teachers, the language arts teachers, have been trained in reading apprenticeship strategies. And so we've been working with this instructional framework for improving our students' literacy. My school in particular is Cesar Chavez Middle School. I've been here since 2007. We're a big school, 1,200 students. But we also have about 2/3 of those kids on free and reduced lunch, and over 300 EL students. So we definitely have struggling learners in our classes. We're a science department of 9, and we work very collaboratively together, planning our lessons, planning our sequence of cycles, and doing professional development together. One of the things that brought me to Reading Apprenticeship, and I think Will brought this up as well, is you know, so many of my students were struggling with the reading of texts in our classes, and I didn't see myself as a science teacher, as a reading teacher. And so anything that I could do to sort of bring that literacy up, because I felt like we really couldn't afford to wait around for students to learn their skills to be able to read the text. I had to figure out strategies to help them figure these things out on their own. And I started to see through the Reading Apprenticeship approach how we could teach them some of these strategies to critically work their way through things. It was sort of like teaching science in the reading. So I was getting at two things at once, literacy and critical thinking skills all at once. And so that's sort of the way we sort of approached our work with Reading Apprenticeship. One of the things we do as a group, and this is throughout our school and our district, is we really try to use this idea of getting the anchor information that students need up where they can find it. So we try to, these are not the best pictures, but we try to get different sorts of things where we can get those strategies in places that are usable for students so that they can fall back on and get that sort of supports that they need to be able to figure out what's going on and puzzle through things themselves. I mean, we kind of come at it from the theory of, the person who's doing the work is doing the learning. So if I'm telling them everything, I'm doing all the work. But if the students are really figuring it out by themselves and together, it makes it a more meaningful experience for them. And so that's sort of the way we go through that. We've established lots of routines. And what's nice, because we work with the core teachers as well, is that the routines go across the school. So we have lots of different things that we do school-wide to sort of emphasize the Reading Apprenticeship way, I guess, of tackling text. And we provide lots of routines and scaffolds to help our students that are having trouble. Another area that next one, sorry. We have a district-wide focus on Reading Apprenticeship, and this idea of metacognitive conversation, of getting the students to really think about what is it that's going on and what are the difficulties and how can I work through, like what am I thinking about, and making that thinking visible so that they can see that it's not magic. And what we do when we look at a text. We use a routine called talking to the text sometimes, and not always, but and the reason I say sometimes is that so much of the text I'm using now is not on a physical, like we don't have a textbook. One doesn't exist for NGSS. So we're piecing together texts, and many times they're not printed. A lot of times we're providing it to them on the screen. And so it kind of lends itself to how do we get students to really grapple with text when they're looking at it on a screen? It's been a puzzlement that we've been working on over the past few years as we've gone further and further into reading online. But we do try to make sure we're getting many types of text from different sources, and so that students have a way to sort of get at the learning from different areas. So that's kind of one of our strategies that we've been working on as we work through these things. We have also embedded in this is sort of a school-wide focus. Because we have so many ELs and because everyone's learning English, we have this school-wide focus on speaking and listening. And so we create talk stems and learning stems that we try to make sure that we're really emphasizing this idea that it's important for students to have meaningful academic conversations. That's really the only way the students are going to move forward, and that's going to help them with their literacy. So it sort of starts with the how do we talk in a more academic way, and then that moves into grappling with the text. And so our speaking and listening standards are really key to a lot of the things that we do in terms of class and class discussions, group discussions, and partner discussions. My students rarely do anything by themselves until they take the final summative assessment. Almost everything we do in some form or another, we work with others. And one of our questions that we come up with a lot is, we really want, our goal is to get the students to give each other feedback and to disagree with each other, because that's how we know really people are moving forward, both in their literacy and in their science thinking. And that's tough. As a middle school teacher, that's really, maybe for everyone, but it's like, how do we get students to disagree with each other to move forward their scientific thinking? And so as we go through here, as our implementation route, if you will, at our middle school, we've been in NGSS now for 4 years. And we started 4 years ago with our 6th graders, and all of our 6th grade teachers basically switched, and the rest of the grade levels, we helped them. So we helped them, all 3 grade levels helped write their new curriculum for them. at the end of that year. Then 7th grade jumped in the next year, and we all got on board helping 7th grade implement. And then in the 3rd year, we in the 8th grade, I'm an 8th grade science teacher, we jumped in. That way, in that year, which was 2 years ago, all students had the NGSS way, if you will. That's how we did it, and we had lots of support from our district for to go through and sort of break up all these ideas and sort of come up with our way, our storyline, if you will, because when we implemented, there was no printed storyline that exists now. And so we had already sort of, so we thought we couldn't afford to wait for the state to come out with a framework, so we sort of started earlier. But we focused on all of these things you see on this slide: reading, the speaking, listening, the argumentation, and trying as best we could. 8th grade was very difficult to keep on a storyline. Let's see. So at this point, I guess, because I'm speeding through this section to kind of make up for some time, but we wanted you to share some of your own classroom examples about how you can use scientific text to improve sense making.
I don't know. Carolyn, I think we can keep moving here as we share. That would be great. Folks are posting things in.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I got a little distracted. So yeah, bringing up, someone has mentioned earlier about bringing up confusions, and that's really something that we celebrate when students tell us they're confused, or when they share that their mistakes or where they've made their mistakes. It's like we get really excited here, and so we try to sort of bring up the idea that, hey, mistakes are how we learn, and confusion is how we move forward in our understanding. So yeah. I see lots of good things in here. Yeah, great. Okay. Well, I wanted in this next section to just talk about just an example, and this example that I'm going to use is not something, obviously, as I'm showing it to you, something that I created, but it's something that we found and actually had in our back pocket from well before we implemented it in CSS. And I think there's a link here on this slide. It's there at the bottom where you can actually get this if you haven't seen it before. We used this sort of phenomenon-based activity to bridge. It helped us out because, one, it had a variety of texts in it that we could present to the students to grapple with. And it had, as its core idea, they had to make an argument, so they had to basically stake a claim about what they thought the best solution was. So that was great. It sort of worked on that element of the science framework. And it, interestingly enough, bridged the gap between two of our huge learning segments, between astronomy and properties of waves. And so this unit, little mini unit that we did, is sort of an example of a type of text that I would use in my classroom. And in a nutshell, what we did is we had them read. A problem was presented to them, and where a bunch of things were happening, and they had to create sort of a calendar of what the events were. And then after they grappled with that, we gave them a variety of text to look at to sort of research what could be causing these things. And after they had done that, we had them sort of work together with their groups and come up with their idea of what their claim would be for what could be causing these strange events that were described. And all throughout here, we have them working with their partners in their groups, sort of going over some of the text and talking about it. And the end product, well, actually not the end product, one of the intermediary products of this was that they had to use our group whiteboards, and they had to, together as a group, come up with their claim for how they would describe what was going on here. And there's a couple of the group work boards that they did here. And so as they worked together as a group to sort of come up with their claim, they had to back it up with evidence and reasoning from multiple texts. And that was the task that they were charged with as a group. And after giving them time to do this, what we did, the sticky notes that you see there, and I believe I have it on the next slide, is I had the students, after they had some time to create their claim as a group, they had to go around and basically read each other's work and comment on it. So each table had to leave a comment on another person, on another table's board. And so it was a way for us to not only for them to see other people's ideas and hopefully get some better ideas for themselves, but also to provide that feedback that they need as a group. And so the idea here is that this took, you know, after going around and having them a chance to do this and giving them that chance to work together and grapple with it, then I brought them back to their desks and they set about making their own claim. Some groups' claims, as you can see on this slide, weren't the best, but others started to get the level of complexity starts to get higher, and they were able to see examples of more complete claims with evidence and reasoning. So they could sort of, the students that were having trouble could get an idea of what a good argument and a good evidence might look like before they had to do it by themselves. So that's sort of a...
I want to just ask, Carolyn, what was the hardest thing about this activity? And what is the piece that the students struggled with the most?
You know, I think the struggle, and this is the struggle students have is when they're looking at text and trying to figure out which is the best example. And someone earlier in the chat, when we were looking at what do you look for in text, mentioned this. What's the, you know, when you get those distractor texts, and sometimes students have difficulty telling which is the best text to use as evidence. Like some of these are not going to provide good evidence at all, and they have to be able to read them critically and figure out which ones are giving them information that's usable and which ones are basically they can disregard. And we had a whole day where we looked at the text, and the students had to figure out which were the important texts and which were the ones we should disregard. We actually had a big discussion, an argument, if you will, about that, and some students disagreed and other students didn't, and we went back and forth on which texts are more valuable than others from the set. And after that was a struggle for some of my students, is sort of figuring out, because they're used to this, like, well, you gave me the text, it must be right. Like, so we like to throw in the distractors just to make sure they're really thinking critically about what they're reading. And that took a while. There was a whole piece in there where they had to struggle with that. And also the text didn't give them all the answers. And I liked that about this. So they couldn't get a complete answer by just looking at the text they were presented. So we did actually give them an opportunity to go and research some of those unanswered questions on their own. But we did not allow them to Google search them. We never do. And so we provided another series of texts on that they could go look to see, and it was a very wide and varied set. It was a web page with a bunch of links to different texts that we had found, and again, some more useful than others. We were trying to see if they could really weed out the ones that were going to help them. And so, the students, so they were really trying to sort of synthesize a whole bunch of information down into their claim and evidence and reasoning that made the most sense. In the end, as someone here, a lot of their claims ended up being very similar, which because I mean, the downside of this activity was there really was only one right answer. I try really hard to find things where there's not only one right answer, but oftentimes at my level in science there is one right answer, and so, you know, that's it. But so most of the students did end up in the end with something close to an answer a right answer, if you will, and it's just a matter of how they backed up that answer with their evidence and their reasoning. And that really was the difference in quality of their final product. How did they back up that claim? And that's the part that's the most challenging. It's the part we struggle with, is our students can make claims. They can find the claim, and they can even put evidence down there. But the reasoning piece, connecting it back to the learning and how the science, that's the part that's really rough.
Carolyn just posed a question. Do you have any criteria to help students selecting stronger sources? And then maybe that's a question you'll address later, but just thought it popped up as well.
A criteria for the students to select or for me to select? I didn't see that one.
Yeah, it just got posted privately, but I think it meant to come to the whole group, so I'll repost it. You know, Carol, if you want to repost it, that would be great.
Yeah, because I think that there's a different, I mean, in my mind, I'll kind of take it from both sides. When I'm looking for a text set for students, like we as teachers are looking for text sets, we try to find some that have that variety. When we're finding those distractor texts for students, we want to try to see, for us, we say, you know, our big thing is, does it help move forward your argument? And is there evidence in there that doesn't have anything to do with the argument? And so that's the piece where we try to sort of let them see, is there, you know, is this text going to help you explain your argument, or is it just taking you off on a side tangent?
Yeah. You know, one of the things I've seen in your rooms and discussions is both reading strategies lists, or certainly making thinking visible about how did we just accomplish this task? Like, if we decided this text was more important, what was our process? And that's what helps students be able to carry it forward. What was our knowledge, and build knowledge about actually how you do that, by making that thinking visible, by first setting them up and having that problem, but then in that working it out through together, the students thinking about how they actually came to that conclusion and sorted it out in their evidence and their reasoning, that pulls it forward as a knowledge. I'm not sure if I'm super clear with that, but that's actually part of the reading process, and readers need to do that. And so the sort of making thinking visible about how you actually accomplish that literacy goal of determining what evidence from what text and what text actually provided evidence. You know, I see that surface in your room, and then that becomes knowledge that they can bring on to future challenges.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty fantastic, and you do it quite naturally. You know, we're going to get to see how you pull students and support their making their thinking visible. And I think we're probably going to pass by this pause pretty quickly. But I will ask you just take a minute to, if you haven't already, to look at what some of the questions people have put in chat. People have been talking about the issue of how to handle media sources and their sources, fake news, for instance. Lots of great things going on in the chat. There's one last little bit I want to get into briefly, but the whole goal of this third section really is now just to get a chance to see what sort of this sort of instruction Carolyn described, what it looks like in process, and so that you get the privilege of seeing a bit of her classroom like I've been able to. I did want to mention something that you're going to see in this video. We've heard about, we've seen those claims, evidence, and reasoning posters, and really they're a huge help and support for getting the thoughts out and students thinking out, and as a scaffold for learning to argue. And to actually engage students in, well, you got to get the reasoning, and what evidence are you going to draw on, and how does it connect to the claim, and allows each of those to sort of be taught to, if you will, and and be spotlighted and have conversations about how we go about them. And the other sort of framework that people think about is learning to argue, and it highlights the idea, arguing to learn, of how to actually build content knowledge through the argument. And I think you saw both of those going on in Carolyn's class, in the scaffolds or supports form and some of the student work, where they are definitely trying to figure out scientific information and build knowledge through the argument process while learning how to argue. And certainly there's been work in both of those fields. There's a third way to think about argumentation instruction that's I think very helpful, and that's interactive argument. And that's the sort of argumentation that readers do, or communities of readers do, to make sense of a text, to find out what it means, why it matters, and, what it says, and that's to actually interpret the text of science, or just as well a primary source in history or a piece of literature. There's a lot of interactive argumentation, and in the video I want you to sort of think about where these different types of argumentation actually are happening, and particularly I think interactive argumentation comes to the foreground. So we're going to Carolyn's school, to her classroom. We're going to see students grapple with a science text. I think another one that one that they pulled together and transformed into a inquiry and argumentation unit. And certainly students have been doing some work before they met these texts, and this was sort of a just-in-time sort of situation. Here we have the wolf's journey from the Three Little Pigs, to speak of it in a very literary way. We have text, we have on the left, we have graphics with the position and time graph, one type of graph here on the right. So those already two different types of text going on. This is just the top of the page. I made it so you could read it. Let's look at the bottom of the page. And here we have more text. We actually have an equation going on here. So multiple text types and representations. The text to the right is still about the wolf's journey being put in graphical form, but now we have a speed and time graph. And particularly, we're going to hear Carolyn support her students with some conundra about what's going on in these different areas in the speed time graph, which was sort of a whole other level of thinking for them. And we're going to have a chance to see Carolyn support them. And so there's a couple different ways for you to watch the video. We're gonna put it on right here and turn it on, and it'll come onto your screen. You can also we'll push out the link into chat, I think, and so you can get it from click it and watch it on your own browser. And maybe for some of you that would be the better solution. Whichever of those ways you watch it. Do you want to jump in, Julie?
Yeah, we'll start first with showing it and only use the Vimeo if that doesn't work. We'll ask the presenters now to mute all our phones, and just give us a hands up when you finish watching it by hitting the hands up or the check. And how long is the video, just to clear the rules?
5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. So we should see back, and only use the Vimeo if it doesn't work, so we're off. And post your reflections in the chat.
What I wondered is, as I looked at some of your papers, were you able to label this graph the way you labeled the first one, like with A, B, C, D, E, F? Did you guys do that? I see some yeses and some no's.
Carolyn, can you mute your phone?
From on the graph.
Bill, it looks like it's finished for most people.
Thank you so much for bringing us back. I had to get my mic re-unmuted, turned back on. So I know we're kind of winding down right here, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that there's certainly a lot of things going on in the chat that's very good. And certainly now people are diving into one of the other areas of evidence and argument, considering the relevance and credibility. Really neat. I wanted to ask you to note and put up in the chat, if you have a moment, what did you notice about students engaging in interactive argumentation, that argument to make sense of the text, and how the teacher supported the students to engage in that reading and reasoning process.
Well, Will, I think we've had some folks stop posting.
I got caught up writing a quick response to one of the great posts that I saw already, where someone was highlighting how important it is to have argumentation happen quite frequently because it's such a good thing for students, but then the challenge of how actually can we get students arguing more often. And I thought one of the things is that interactive argumentation, when you're working through text and interpreting, there should be an argumentative element to actually nail down what interpretation really can we have a good evidence-based claims coming out of this text. And thank you for reposting it to the whole group, because I probably just posted it just to the panelists, so thank you very much.
No worries.
And people were highlighting how Carolyn had this judgment to ask the questions and give the students work time, and this is such a formative assessment. What's the question you can turn back to the students and let them grapple with that then they can make progress on? And we saw her doing that a couple times in this video. Really reflects it's a huge judgment call, as well as that bravery to turn the work over to students and the know-how how actually to do that. So how are we doing time-wise, Julie? Do we need to sort of move?
No, it's 6 minutes. I want to, Carolyn, do you have any focus and reflections on the post people are posting? We have 1 or 2 minutes left here, and then we'll, and folks, please post in any final questions as well. So we have 5 minutes, Will.
Oh, great, thank you. Trying to look at definitely a lot of great ideas in the posting. People talking about how there's multiple levels of work going on, both the literacy work, the science reading work, and also the building of knowledge, and how both the sort of making thinking visible and argumentation are working hand in hand. With that, I think people are noting some things they saw in the video about the multiple levels of work. Well, I'm going to pull us ahead to this last slide. Thank you, Julie, for moving us there. And, you know, we looked at really briefly a lot of factors that go into the idea of using text as resources for inquiry and for argumentation. We also thought about the various the scaffolds, interaction between the scaffolds, the text, and all the teacher mediation decision-making that they do to use text as a resource for inquiry and to get argumentation going on in the classroom. And I think Carolyn shared some great ideas about that and showed a sort of an illustration of it. We had a chance to see her class. And I think, you know, this comes back to sort of this early idea. When it comes to reading for argumentation in science or in English and in history and in any of our subject areas, is that we actually can do this. And it can make a difference for our students. Yes, we can is really what I want to say about this and leave you with. Again, we have some resources and future learning, and Julie's going to tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you, Will and Carolyn. I also invite folks in the last few minutes, if you have any final questions and thoughts for Will and Carolyn, please post them in. And we have posted a survey. If you have to leave a few minutes early, if you could give us your feedback. As you said, this has been a series that we've been so excited to profile in partnership from the Secondary Literacy Partnership with the Strategic Literacy Initiative on disciplinary literacy. And we've focused on leadership and social emotional learning and evidence-based argumentation. I know these are all blended into the Reading Apprentice model as well. We have extension activities as a follow-up in the collaborateincommon.org environment, and we'll do a deep dive into some of the activities that were discussed today, and we'll tell you more about that. We want to continue the conversation, so if you don't belong to Collaborate in Common after this webinar, we'll be sending you out where you can sign up for that conversation. And the resources that we'll reference will be referenced in there, as well as you can find them here at the site. We'll post that in. And these are different stems and pieces and activities that will complementary to the conversation. And the extension activity, we have Heather Hewlett from the Strategic Literacy Initiative, who will be focusing and sponsoring and hosting that. So here's a little bit of information. And the link is here. This is the space that we really want you to sign up for. And without further ado, please do the survey. The archives and the handouts for today's presentation are posted in Box and will be posted on the WestEd site, as well as on the Secondary Strategic Literacy Initiative site. And the Secondary Literacy Partnership will be disseminating those as part of our video set that we have, a channel of all our past events. The Strategic Literacy Initiative has lots of other places to find out more, and we invite you to continue the conversation with us in the Collaboration in Common as part of this focus on disciplinary literacy. So thank you. If you have any more questions, you can email me here, juliejduffy@wested.org. But as we turn it over for final questions, I again want to really thank Will and Carolyn for being with us and give us their parting thoughts on next steps. We've got the resources as well as places to go and follow up. So Will and Carolyn, I would love to give you the opportunity to thank you all again and to thank our participants for coming out after a busy day out there in the classroom and supporting students and teachers. So final thoughts, Will and Carolyn. Will, first to you.
I appreciate that people came out, but they engaged and had such great ideas. You know, it's a lovely thing when we have many people working on such a challenging problem as literacy and supporting our students, or opportunity to actually make things better for them. So I was really pleased with everyone's thinking and engagement. Appreciated that.
Carolyn, thank you. And any final thoughts or advice or comments?
No, it's just this process is really, it takes a really long time, and it's a lot of hard work, but it's really worth it when you start seeing the changes that start happening in your classroom and the level of confidence that happens in my students. I mean, I'm not perfect every day, but it's this work has really helped them.
And thank you both for sharing it with us today, and everyone for turning out the evidence-based argumentation, science, and reading apprenticeship approach. We invite you to keep posted about further events about this topic, and thank you for all the great work you all do, and please thank you for doing the survey, and we'll keep you posted. Bye all. Thank you, everyone. I'm officially ending today's recording.